You're listening to Soundside. I'm Libby Dankman. What will it take to save the Lake City Fred Meyer? Is that even possible? Lawmakers and local shoppers are asking those questions after Kroger announced last month that the Lake City location would be part of a wave of regional closures. That's left worries about where people will go for prescriptions and fresh produce. Especially concerning is the possible impact to elderly and low-income residents who may not have access to a car. The Lake City location is part of a wave of closures in the region. Kroger has said the stores are no longer financially viable due to theft and over-regulation, and they will close in October. The Seattle Times' Paul Roberts has been covering efforts to keep the Lake City Fred Meyer open in some form and the potential next chapter for this piece of property. And he's here with more. Paul, welcome back to Soundside. Thanks for being here.
Good to be here. Thanks.
So you've reported on meetings that Seattle area lawmakers have been having with Kroger executives. What's been the tenor of these meetings, and what are lawmakers asking for?
Well, initially, lawmakers got a heads up from Kroger that, hey, we're going to be announcing this closure. And lawmakers were sort of in a panic because, especially around Lake City, community doesn't have a lot of other grocery options. So they reached out and said, let's have a meeting. And the initial meeting was not super promising. They had asked, could you delay the closure so that we could address some of the shoplifting concerns that you had raised, and got pretty lukewarm response. I think more to the point, Kroger made clear that the closure was final, the decision was final, and that it intended to see if it could redevelop the property or even sell it. So at that point, it looked as if there were no options, and lawmakers began thinking about, what kind of policy moves could we make that would either encourage the store to stay open or even penalize the store for closing. Later on, a couple of the lawmakers there had reached out to Kroger and set up some other conversations where they'd sort of revisited the question about could this be delayed, or could we even think about keeping the store open in a limited fashion, a sort of a grocery-only fashion. For those,
closing off the upstairs and only doing the bottom grocery part, yeah.
Right, and Kroger, they said that they had received no assurances from Kroger that was possible, but Kroger was willing to keep meeting on the subject. This was last week that they'd had that meeting last Thursday, and lawmaker I spoke to, Daria Farivar, said, state rep Farivar said that that she expected to have another meeting in the next couple of weeks. Kroger hasn't commented on the meetings, hasn't even acknowledged that they happened. So this is just we're just hearing this from lawmakers. But, it's sort of an interesting possibility given that Kroger has been treating these closures as things that are sort of just part of the normal business process. We review stores periodically. Underperformers are closed. We consider opening new ones in more promising neighborhoods. And yet there seems to be maybe a little, some wiggle room here. So we'll see.
There were these other stores that were announced at the same time as the Lake City location closing: Kent, Redmond, Everett. Have you seen any efforts on those properties to try to keep the stores open, or is Lake City a particularly special case?
I suspect that in all those instances, Kroger reportedly sent these local lawmakers that that represent the Lake City area, gave them a heads up that we're closing it. So I'm assuming they did the same to lawmakers, policymakers for those other stores. So one imagines that there was efforts to for outreach and, hey, can we talk about this? I don't know that that other conversations like that aren't happening. I know a community advocate from Tacoma, where Fred Meyer is also closing a store, reached out and wanted to know, who the lawmakers up here were talking to at Kroger, because they wanted to have that conversation, which I'm sure is making, Kroger, it's probably raising the temperature for Kroger, because, again, one imagines that they have pictured these closures as just part of a sort of almost an administrative operation, and they really probably aren't looking for, reopening the question in each case. Because every community is going to be making the same case. We can't afford to lose a grocery store. We can't afford to lose a pharmacy. We have lots of community members who can't easily travel to another store. And And, then there's these questions around the two complaints that Kroger made were that they needed to close these stores because they were no longer financially viable due to rising theft and regulation.
But you looked at that, Paul, and I'm curious what you make of the data around theft from what you could gather.
Yeah, first of all, so Kroger has declined steadily to offer any specifics on what the costs were for the stores. They haven't said anything about the regulation. We have no idea what that means. What we have is some police data for at least two of the locations, in Everett and in Seattle, the Lake City. And in both those cases, theft appears to be down substantially from the peaks of the pandemic. But the police are very careful to caveat their data by saying that, retailers like Kroger, don't necessarily report all of the theft that's going on in their stores. Like many times they handle it in-house. They've got their own security. Retailers, historically have been pretty frustrated with the police response and in some cases don't bother reporting it. I think theft has been a serious issue and continues to be. It's just hard to gauge how much of an issue.
And Paul, what options are left for Lake City residents? They've lost a Bartell's recently, a Walgreens. I mean, where do they go for grocery and pharmacy these days?
Well, the nearest full-service grocery is about a half mile away. It's the grocery outlet. Certainly people have explained this to me in emails that grocery outlet is not full service. We can quibble over what the definition is, but there's Safeway and QFCs, but those are like a mile and more away. So it's tough. I mean, this is an area, I think, that really does have a shortage of full-service grocery options, and it has a population that, many of which will struggle to, go to those other places. So it's a real impact.
Yeah, and I just think about that little kind of Main Street, Lake City Way area, and what a huge chunk of that community the Fred Meyer represents, at least that the commercial core of Lake City that Fred Meyer represents. It's hard to imagine it, closed and, where that leaves residents. What's the timeline, by the way, for this if it ends up going to closure and there's no way to keep it even partially open?
It was 60 days, so sometime in October. And again, the lawmakers felt that was too short a time for them to be able to sort of look into issues of theft. I mean, what they really felt was like, look, if you're going to make theft the issue, then at least give us a time to investigate this. I think, further, the lawmakers felt that they had been making efforts working with city police to sort of step up the enforcement and step up the policing there. And the same in the case of Everett. And it was really, it was insulting to be told that, theft is the issue here, and to not even give lawmakers a chance to sort of revisit that issue. So I think that they had a fairly good argument to present to Kroger as to why, they should delay this, and, who knows what it leads to. I think the other thing to consider is that, these stores are anchors in these commercial districts. That's not just a lot of real estate, but this is the reason that people might come down to a community center to begin with. It's also where a lot of people see each other. It's a hub. It's a sort of, you see your neighbors and your friends there. And so the loss is kind of bigger than just the loss of access to groceries or to housewares. It's sort of a commercial center that looks to be in risk of going away.
Really quickly before we go, the real estate underneath this store is part of this conversation. And even if Kroger's not saying it, it appears that they are thinking about what this real estate could be in the future. There's, a redevelopment conversation happening. Can you give us kind of the down low on where this parcel of land may go in the future?
Well, first of all, Kroger was, reportedly in that meeting with lawmakers, it was pretty explicit about that they were going to do a request for proposals, and I think that was part of their way of sort of punctuating their argument that this closure decision was final.
Request for proposals to redevelop?
Right. Yeah. So basically, they would ask for developers to come in and say, "Hey, what should we do with this 5.5-acre parcel? That's valued at around $25 million, according to the last King County assessment." And they will also consider an outright sale. And the speculation, of course, is that they look at their portfolio of stores and they say, in any given store, does it make more sense to continue to operate this as a retail operation? Can we make more profit over the next 20 years? Or would it make sense to just sell it right now or redevelop it? I mean, it's basically math, setting aside the impacts it has on the community. Right now, it's a tough time to develop property. As we point out in the story, the rents in Lake City are so low comparatively that if you're a developer trying to borrow money and build an apartment, you're not going to be able to charge enough to repay your own investment in that. So that could change in a couple of years, but it just makes the whole redevelopment question a little bit dicey as well. So it feels to me a little bit like maybe Kroger doesn't have great options for a location like that, and maybe that's why it's willing to have a conversation with local, lawmakers about maybe coming up with ways to keep it open. What sort of policy changes would be necessary? I don't know. I just think that it's interesting that that conversation apparently is happening, and that Kroger is apparently willing to keep having the conversation. So we'll, stay tuned.
Paul Roberts, business reporter with the Seattle Times. Thank you very much for your reporting.
My pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Soundside. And hey, this show is only possible because listeners support us. If you are able to give right now, check out the show notes for a link to donate. And don't forget, you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 FM Seattle at noon and 8 p.m., Monday through Thursday, or anytime online at KUOW.org.